My mom works at NASA. She said. The whole class erupted in laughter, until a badge appeared, shifting everything. It was a Tuesday right after recess. The classroom held the faint sense of hand sanitizer and pencil shavings. Ms. Lawson had barely finished roll call when she clapped her hands. All right, everyone, time for our What My Parent Does presentations. One by one, kids stood sharing tales. A firefighter dad, a mom who ran a local bakery, even an older brother in the army who technically didn't count but still earned applause. Then it was Talia Jefferson's turn. She rose slowly, clutching a small index card with her name in purple ink. Talia was one of the quieter students, bright but not one to speak, just to hear herself. She scanned the room, meeting no one's gaze in particular, and then stated clearly, "My mom works at NASA." For a beat, silence. Then came the snickers, quickly escalating into full-blown laughter. Not an explosion of sound, but a ripple that intensified with each confused or amused chuckle passed around the room. "Wait, NASA," someone blurted from the back. "You mean like the space people?" "She's lying," another voice whispered, not quietly enough. Even Ms. Lawson's expression faltered. She didn't laugh, but her eyebrows lifted, a subtle hint of disbelief. Talia blinked, slow and deliberate. She didn't shout. She didn't flee. She simply stood there, face composed, hands steady. "Yes," she repeated. "She works at NASA. She's a systems engineer." The words hung in the air, seemingly out of place. Ms. Lawson, standing near the board, offered one of those tight-lipped smiles that signaled we're moving on now. "Well, thank you, Talia," she said, already scanning her clipboard. "Okay, next up we have Owen." Talia returned to her seat, ignoring the snickers and nudges. Her fingers tightened around the hem of her shirt. Her face remained neutral, but her ears burned. Owen began describing his dad's plumbing business, but Talia barely registered a word. She knew they didn't believe her. Not a single one of them. Not even the teacher. It wasn't just the job that seemed impossible. It was her claiming it. A girl with rich brown skin, tight braids secured by a soft pink scrunchie, a hand-me-down backpack with a broken zipper. Her shoes weren't new. She lacked fancy words or a booming voice. So to them her saying NASA sounded like pure fantasy. A crumpled note landed on her desk during Owen's talk. A boy named Theo leaned in. "Did she clean the bathrooms there or something?" Talia didn't respond. She didn't cry either, not then. But when the bell rang and everyone scrambled for their bags, she remained in her seat, eyes fixed on the classroom door. For the first time she wished her mom had a different job. Something simpler to explain. Something people didn't eye skeptically. Still, even then she didn't stop believing it mattered. Her mom once told her, "Some truths are too big for small minds. You just let them catch up." Talia left that classroom with her head held high, even if her stomach felt knotted. She wasn't embarrassed for herself. She was embarrassed for them. But what she didn't know was that the lesson wasn't over. Not for her classmates and not for Ms. Lawson either. The Jefferson house sat at the edge of a quiet street in Mobile, Alabama. Not flashy but neat, painted pale yellow with green shutters. The kind of place where the porch light glowed before sunset and the screen door gave a slight creak. Talia stepped inside slower than usual, kicked off her sneakers, tossed her backpack near the stairs and headed straight for the kitchen. The aroma of garlic and onions told her her mom was already home. Dr. Renee Jefferson stood at the stove, stirring something in a large red pot. She didn't turn immediately. "You're late," she stated, not harshly, just observing. Talia pulled out a chair and dropped into it. "Had to stay back to wipe down the desks," she mumbled. Renee turned, took one look at her daughter's face and lowered the flame. "Talk to me." Talia hesitated, her hands in her lap, fidgeting with her hoodie sleeves. She looked like she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. "They laughed," she finally said. Renee didn't need to ask who. She pulled out the chair opposite her daughter and sat down. No dramatics, no gasp or panic. "Why?" "I told them you work at NASA." Renee gave the faintest nod. "And they didn't believe you?" "Nope. One kid even said maybe you clean the bathrooms." Renee let out a quiet breath, less a sigh and more a pause to compose herself. "And what did you say back?" "I didn't." Ms. Lawson moved on real fast, like she didn't want to deal with it. That part made Renee's eyebrows twitch slightly, but she kept her tone even. "Do you believe you said anything wrong?" Talia looked up quickly. "No." Then don't wear their ignorance like it's your mistake. Their laughter? That's on them, not on you. They sat in silence for a moment, the bubbling of the pot filling the quiet. Outside, a dog barked twice, then stopped. You know, Renee began, getting up to stir the food again. When I first told people I wanted to work in aerospace, my high school guidance counselor told me to be more realistic. Said I should consider secretarial work. Talia's eyes widened. That was in '98. I didn't argue with her, just stopped going to her office. Did it hurt? Renee turned off the stove and faced her daughter again. Yeah. But it also lit a fire. I wasn't angry at her. I was determined not to let her decide who I could be. Talia offered a small smile. She liked that her mom always spoke plainly but never dramatically. There was strength in her calm demeanor. You know, I could come to your class, Renee added casually. Parent Day is this Friday, right? Talia blinked. You'd do that. I get the day off anyway. And it might be fun. But what would you wear? Renee grinned. I was thinking maybe my NASA badge. And that black blazer you hate. Talia's eyes lit up. Okay, yeah. Do that. Thought so. They both laughed, then real belly-deep laughter. The air in the kitchen felt lighter. Renee served them bowls of stew and set them on the table. As they ate, she recounted stories. Her first job interview, the time she accidentally spilled coffee on a flight simulator keyboard. The tales made Talia giggle and she no longer felt small. She felt lucky. Remember, Renee said as they finished, you don't owe anyone proof. But if the moment comes when you feel like showing them, just know I've got your back. Talia nodded slowly, mouth full of food. And your badge. Renee smirked. That too. But she wasn't coming just to make a point. She was coming to shift the entire room. Talia just didn't know it yet. Friday arrived faster than Talia expected. All week, whispers still drifted through the classroom like dust motes in sunlight. A few kids offered awkward apologies. One gave her a crumpled fruit snack, another muttered, I was just joking. But most acted as if nothing had happened, which was fine by Talia. She hadn't forgotten. By the time the morning bell rang, the classroom buzzed with anticipation. Ms. Lawson had rearranged the desks into a horseshoe, making space for parents to sit and present. She wore a purple blouse and had laid out a tray of sugar cookies, clearly store-bought, a meager attempt to make the event feel festive. Talia sat near the middle, her backpack neatly tucked beneath her chair. She was nervous but not scared, more a quiet anticipation. She hadn't told anyone her mom was coming. The first parents entered around 9:15. A man in a mechanic's uniform, a woman in scrubs, a few moms with tote bags and Starbucks cups who smiled and waved a little too hard. The presentations began. There was polite clapping, light laughter. One dad recounted fixing an exploding sink. Another mom discussed teaching yoga to toddlers. Talia kept glancing at the door. Then just as Ms. Lawson was introducing the next speaker, it opened. Dr. Renee Jefferson stepped into the room. She wore that black blazer Talia disliked, tailored and crisp. Her ID badge hung from a navy lanyard, reading NASA Johnson Space Center. Black slacks, no jewelry save for a silver watch. Her expression was calm, not smug, not flashy, just present. The room fell silent in an instant. Even the air felt still. Ms. Lawson stammered, Talia stood. This is my mom, Dr. Renee Jefferson. The teacher blinked, lips parted, then forced a smile. Right. Welcome. Would you like to tell us about your work? Renee gave a polite nod. Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm an aerospace systems engineer at NASA. I work on mission planning, flight systems integration, and operation strategy for our lunar and Mars programs. Several heads swiveled toward Talia. A few mouths hung open. One kid whispered, Whoa. Renee continued, unhurried, her voice possessing a clear, smooth, grounded rhythm. Most of my job involves designing systems that allow astronauts to travel safely in space. We look at everything from how they breathe to how data is transmitted back to Earth. He paused, letting it sink in. I didn't come here to impress you, though, she added, scanning the room. I came here because my daughter said she told you what I do and some of you didn't believe her. Silence. Talia's heartbeat pounded in her ears. She dared not blink. Renee stepped closer to the whiteboard and tapped a printed diagram she'd brought, a real schematic from a past project. You don't have to understand all of this. That's okay. But the next time someone tells you something that sounds too big to believe, take a second before you laugh. Because brilliance doesn't always show up in the package you expect. She turned toward her daughter. And when someone tells the truth with pride, don't shrink it down. Let it stand. Ms. Lawson cleared her throat. Thank you, Dr. Jefferson. That was very enlightening. Renee smiled and walked over to sit beside Talia, who was trying hard not to grin like a fool. The room moved slowly after that. The next parents stumbled through their presentation about running a car dealership. No one laughed. No one whispered. And Talia? She sat taller than she ever had before. She didn't look around for approval. She didn't need it. Because in that moment her truth was loud enough for everyone to hear. But what most of them didn't realize was that the woman they just met hadn't always been listened to either. And her road to NASA was filled with 1,000 moments just like this one. Before she was Dr. Renee Jefferson, she was simply Renee Lewis. A lanky teenager with glasses too big for her face and notebooks filled with diagrams no one else in her neighborhood cared about. She grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in a house with a sagging front porch and a mama who worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on. She knew early on she preferred machines to makeup. While other girls played jump rope, Renee built small contraptions from broken fans and old cassette players. Her uncle once called her odd. She heard different. She took it as a compliment. At 13, she picked up a book about space shuttles at the public library and devoured it in one night. By 14, she was teaching herself basic programming. She didn't talk much about it at school. She'd quickly learned that saying, "I want to work at NASA," would either get you mocked or ignored. Her teachers didn't push her not because she wasn't smart. Renee had straight A's in every subject, but because they had already decided what she was likely to become. "You're really organized," one counselor told her. "You'd be great as a receptionist." When she mentioned applying to a summer program for young engineers at Georgia Tech, her math teacher raised his eyebrows. "That's pretty competitive. Are you sure you want to waste the application fee?" She applied anyway. He got in. That summer changed everything. For the first time she was surrounded by kids who thought the way she did. Notebooks full of questions, curiosity without apology. She returned home with a folder of blueprints and a clear sense of direction. But college was another uphill climb. At Auburn University, she was one of only 3 black women in the entire engineering department. In group projects, she was always asked to take notes instead of solving equations. Professors mispronounced her name even after 3 semesters. She didn't complain. She kept showing up. Renee worked nights at a diner near campus and tutored high school students on weekends. There were times she considered giving up, not because she couldn't handle the work, but because it was exhausting constantly proving she belonged. One spring, after acing a thermodynamics midterm, she overheard 2 classmates whispering behind her back. "She must have had help," one said. "Maybe she copied from someone," the other added. She didn't confront them. She didn't cry. She just went home, opened her textbook and started preparing for finals. When the semester ended, she ranked first in her department. No one could say it out loud, but they saw it. After graduation, she interned at Lockheed Martin. Then came the application to NASA. A shot in the dark, she thought. But her resume stood on its own. She got the call in March, sitting in a laundromat with a basket of wet towels and 1 working dryer. Her mama cried on the phone for 5 whole minutes. From there, the real work began. The meetings, the designs, the late nights, the subtle stares in conference rooms, the moments she had to repeat herself 3 times to be heard. But she never stopped speaking up. Because every time she sat at a console or sketched a new idea, she remembered a younger version of herself who only needed one person to believe it was possible. And now, walking into her daughter's 5th grade classroom with that badge swinging from her neck, she wasn't just representing herself. She was standing in for every girl who'd ever been told, "People like you don't do that." But this wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about planting something new in her daughter that couldn't be shaken. The following Monday something felt different. Not in a fireworks and parade way, just small shifts, the kind you only notice if you're really looking. When Talia entered class, she didn't expect a celebration and she didn't get one. But the air was quieter. Eyes didn't roll when she spoke. Theo didn't whisper. In fact, he actively avoided eye contact. At recess, 2 girls, Kennedy and Samira, approached her near the jungle gym. They shifted their weight awkwardly. "My mom said your mom's speech was really something," Kennedy said, chewing her bottom lip. She sounded smart. Like really smart. She is, Talia replied without a hint of hesitation. Samira nodded. I looked up NASA stuff after school. It's kind of cool. That was all they said, but they didn't walk away immediately. They stayed. And for the first time all year, the three of them sat on the bench and talked about something other than snack traits or slime videos. Later that day, Ms. Lawson pulled Talia aside as the class packed up for dismissal. I wanted to say something, she began, her voice softer than usual. About last week. Talia looked up, alert. I should have handled that moment differently, Ms. Lawson continued. I should have asked more questions, not moved on so fast. I'm sorry. Talia wasn't sure what to say. She wasn't accustomed to adults apologizing like that. She nodded once, slowly. It was enough for now. But not everyone had a change of heart. Some kids still whispered, but they did it more carefully. A few looked at her as if waiting for her to mess up, just to restore balance in their own minds. There was one boy, Dean, who muttered, NASA kid, under his breath every time she walked by, as if trying to chip away at what she'd gained. Talia didn't flinch. She didn't shrink. She just kept doing her work. She asked more questions in class now. She raised her hand even when she wasn't totally sure she was right, because now even getting something wrong didn't scare her like it used to. One afternoon during group work, she overheard a classmate say, "She thinks she's better than us." Talia looked up calmly and replied, "No. I just know I belong here." There was no argument after that. At home, Renee noticed the shift too. Talia talked more at dinner, sharing small things about her day without being prompted. And she started drawing again, not cartoons but diagrams like her mother's. Rockets, helmets, star maps in pencil. One evening, Renee found a post-it note stuck on the fridge. It read, "I'm going to work there too. Love, Talia." It didn't move for 3 days. But this wasn't just about confidence. Something deeper had changed in Talia. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong anymore. It was about standing in her own truth, knowing what was real no matter who laughed. In gym class, when the teacher asked them to write down a goal unrelated to sports, Talia wrote, "Engineer space missions just like my mom." When the teacher read it aloud, no one laughed. They just listened. But back at home, something else was stirring. A quiet, anchoring moment waiting between mother and daughter. It was Friday night again, a full week since Parent Day, and the house smelled of Renee's famous lemon chicken. Talia was at the kitchen table sketching a new design. Something about a rotating satellite that used solar panels shaped like flower petals. She drew silently, occasionally erasing or squinting at an angle. Renee watched from the sink, drying a dish slowly. Her daughter's concentration, tongue pressed slightly against her upper lip, reminded her of herself at 12, always building something in her head. "Want to take a break?" Renee asked gently. Talia glanced up. "Almost done." Renee smiled and leaned against the counter. "You've been working on that for 2 hours." "I know. I just wanted to look right." She finished the last line and turned the paper toward her mom. Renee walked over and took a closer look. "Explain it to me." "Well, it's a satellite, but instead of keeping all the panels flat, they open up like this." She mimicked the shape with her hands. "So it can collect more energy when it turns depending on the angle of the sun." Renee nodded, impressed. "That's smart. Where'd you get that idea?" "I don't know. I was thinking about sunflowers earlier, how they move during the day. It just kind of came to me." Renee sat down beside her, placing the paper gently on the table. "You know what I love most about that idea?" she asked. "What?" "You weren't trying to impress anyone. You were just trying to solve a problem." Talia looked down at the drawing again. "Yeah, I guess I was." They sat in comfortable silence for a minute. Then Talia spoke again, softer this time. "Do you think they really believed me after you left?" Renee rested her hand on the table. "Some did. Some still don't. That's not something you can always control." "So what do I do?" "You keep showing up. That's the hard part. Not just once but over and over again. You speak the truth even when it feels like no one hears it." Talia thought about that. "Like you did." Renee gave a soft smile. "Like I still do." "Was it always this hard for you?" Renee leaned back in the chair, eyes thoughtful. "Sometimes harder. But I stopped waiting for it to get easy." Talia looked at her mother not just as a parent now but as a person. Someone who had fought through walls she never even saw, someone who carried quiet power without needing a crowd to recognize it. I used to wish you had a regular job, she said, like something easy to explain. Renee laughed. I know. I could see it in your face when people asked. But now I think it's cool. Like really cool. Renee reached out and gently tucked one of her daughter's braids behind her ear. I'm proud of you, you know, she said. Not because of what you said in class, but because you said it anyway. Talia felt a warmth in her chest, not just pride but relief, a weight she hadn't noticed until it began to lift. I didn't think you were going to come that day, she admitted. Renee raised an eyebrow. Why not? I thought maybe you'd think it wasn't worth it. Renee paused, then leaned in closer, her voice firm and steady. Anything that messes with how you see yourself, that's always worth showing up for. They didn't need to say much more. Talia stood and walked over to the fridge, grabbed a magnet and pinned her drawing right next to the grocery list. Renee watched, her heart full but quiet. Not every lesson came with applause. Some simply sat there, visible only to the people who'd earned them. But there was one last thing left to say, not for Talia but for everyone else still learning what brilliance looks like. The next week, during morning announcements, Ms. Lawson did something unexpected. She held up a student submission from the Career Dreams bulletin board and read it aloud to the class. This one is from Talia Jefferson, she said. She wrote, I want to build machines that go to places no person has ever been because someone has to figure out how to get us there. And I think I can. There was no laughter this time. Just stillness. A few students turned to look at her, not with disbelief but something closer to respect. Talia sat at her desk, calm, focused, drawing small gears in the margins of her notebook. She didn't need to look up. She didn't need the room to cheer. That wasn't the point. Because this story was never about applause. It was about truth. About being sure of something when everyone else questions it. About what it means to speak boldly, not to be loud but to be honest. The people in that classroom had seen something they weren't expecting. A woman with credentials, yes, but more than that, a woman who knew who she was, who didn't wait for permission to be heard. And a daughter who watched her walk into a room where belief had already left, and still filled it with power. Renee never had to raise her voice. She never had to list her accomplishments. She showed up and that was enough. But it was Talia who carried the weight of that day. She walked through the fire of ridicule, stood in it, and came out the other side taller. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is believe in yourself out loud, especially when no one else is clapping. And the lesson here isn't just about what job a parent has or how impressive their title sounds. The lesson is about what we teach our children, not with our mouths but with our actions. When you believe in your child, you give them armor. When you show up for them, you give them courage. When you stand beside them, even for just a few minutes in a crowded room, you show them what being heard actually feels like. And when that happens, when a child feels seen not just by a teacher or a classmate but by the world, they stop shrinking themselves. They stop second-guessing. They start walking like they've got something important to say because they do. Talia didn't need to convince anyone anymore. She wasn't waiting for the class to believe her. She had already moved on, focused now on what she believed possible. That's what makes stories like hers matter. Because for every kid who's laughed at, dismissed, or talked over, there's another moment waiting. When the door opens, when the badge flashes, when silence becomes respect. And it stays with them. At the end of the school year, when the class made their memory book, there was a page labeled "Most Likely to." Under Talia's photo, someone had written, "Most likely to launch something into space." She smiled when she saw it, not because it sounded cool but because this time they actually meant it. So the next time a child tells you something bold, don't rush to doubt. Don't reduce them to what you understand. Let them grow beyond what you expect. And if you're a parent watching this, show up even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it counts. Believe them out loud. Subscribe for more true-to-life stories like this. Stories that remind us what strength really looks like.